We know there are a lot of good reasons not to like that we have a president like this in the 21st century. Are these things then that we pile on to the fact that he has character flaws, these impeachable offenses, are they exaggerations, or are they somehow a product of our distaste for his character and his rhetoric?
That's a very good question. And
Eric Byler for TY2 Politics. Are opponents of President Trump demanding impeachment based on political differences more so than rule of law? Catherine Ross is part of a group that's been calling upon Congress to investigate President Trump for exploiting public office for private financial gain. This is part 2 of a 3-part interview.
And I can certainly understand why people said during the first month, well, isn't it too soon? What are you talking about? You know, I couldn't predict some of the things that happened, including firing Jim Comey.
Yeah.
And in such a blatant way, and then confessing on national television. This is why I did it. I didn't like his investigation. And you know, in law and the rules of evidence, we have a term for that. It's an admission against interest, which wherever you make it, it's treated the same as if you said it under oath. Because you wouldn't say something so damaging to yourself if it wasn't true. It's the assumption in the rules of evidence. Not to mention what he then said to the Russians.
Comey was causing a lot of problems with the
Russian. He said, I had a Russian problem. It's gone away. I fired the guy. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
But I took care of it.
Yeah.
I fired him. I took care of it.
These impeachable offenses, are they exaggerations, or are they somehow a product of our distaste for his character and his rhetoric?
That's a very good question. And I try very hard to separate how I feel about the president and how I feel about his policies from my positions on whether he has committed impeachable offenses. If you look at what Bill Clinton was impeached for, because he was impeached by the House of Representatives, which is like an indictment. He was not convicted by the Senate. He was impeached for obstruction of justice, for lying under oath in a deposition in a civil lawsuit about sex. So if you compare that to the obstruction of justice that appears to have taken place when President Trump fired Comey because he hoped to squash the Russian investigation, the latter is clearly more serious.
It's an attack on our country.
As an offense against our country.
Yeah.
So the same people who voted to impeach Clinton and who led the prosecution in the Senate, Lindsey Graham as a senator led the prosecution, and they don't think this is serious enough as a potential matter that might lead to impeachment?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I was raised to be conservative by a military officer.
Oh.
Okay, and I went through a political conversion in part because of that impeachment trial, because it seemed to me that the Republicans were deeply upset that Daddy Bush was defeated not necessarily by a better candidate, but by the fact that there was also a third-party candidate,
Yes.
which diluted the conservative.
So it was a plurality, it wasn't a majority.
So it was an injustice that they couldn't.
Yeah, because they opposed Clinton from day one in the same way they opposed Obama from day one.
Right, right. And then when things shifted from Whitewater to Travelgate to whatever and ended up being about sex, this raised conservative young man was like, these people are nuts. And so I'm just wondering, you know, we've started with emoluments. Now we're talking about obstruction of justice, in between collusion with Russia. Why does the cause for impeachment keep shifting? Is it because people couldn't accept the outcome of the election?
No, I don't think it shifts. I think what we're doing is adding to the causes as the circumstances unfold. In a criminal case, the district attorney might say, well, the main charge is this, but there are all these associated charges, and the jury can convict on one or all.
What's the case that he was already in violation of the Constitution before he took office?
Because he refused to get rid of his businesses, and he was going to continue to profit from them. You can't run a real estate business and not be getting permissions, consents, and privileges from every level of government. Zoning, taxes, environmental permits.
And if you don't get them, you're not in business.
And then you're not in business. So
Right.
he was clear that he wasn't going to divest himself of his business. He was going to continue to take every cent of profit. So the minute he swore his oath of office, he had violated it.
Past presidents had divested from things like peanut farms.
That's correct. That has been the standard way of dealing with it. And even in the world of less tangible businesses, like stock portfolios, presidents give them to someone else to run. They say, I don't want to know what I'm invested in while I'm in office. I'll take the property back when I'm done, but I will have no way of altering my decision-making process or my concerns based on my investments because I don't know what my money's in.
He did have that, before he took office, he had that demonstration with an attorney and lots of paperwork on the table.
Yes, that was nothing but theater. So subsequently, we found out the terms that he had used. So what he did was he set up what's called a revocable trust. That means, first of all, he can change his mind at any minute and cancel that trust. Every cent that he earns while he's president is being put in a special fund for him, and he can draw cash out of it at any time he wants. It's not even set aside till he leaves office. But even if it were set aside till he leaves office, he's profiting during his presidency. He knows exactly what the properties are. And the only thing he did was say, I'm going to let my sons run the business. But his sons have said very clearly, they're talking to him all the time about the business.
I think we've established why you're focused on emoluments, and it's because it's part of your expertise as an attorney and a scholar. I'll share a little bit why I'm interested in it. I had an experience when I was a member of a board where a majority of the board decided that it would be both in the interest of the organization and in their own personal financial interest to enter the organization into basically a pyramid marketing scheme under which the database of emails and the social media assets would then be used to market something that would enrich themselves. And they felt that since they weren't being compensated otherwise, that it was only fair for all the hard work they were doing that they make money. Then I started to receive all kinds of pressure from these individuals not to talk about why I resigned. So all these things sound really familiar. The little threats, the little coded language, attacking James Comey. I had an experience that I guess tuned my ears to all of this a little more. And one of them was fiduciary duty. And so when that was explained to me by an attorney, that I had a duty, and I said, my duty is to whom? The other board members? And she said, no, your duty is to the organization. And I think there might be a parallel here in constitutional law that you could explain that might help our audience have the same tuned ear that I have.
The Constitution makes the central part of the president's job the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. He is the chief executive officer of our nation, and he's supposed to ensure that everything is done with what you call a fiduciary duty to the nation. We, the people of the United States, we are the government. The government reports to us. This was unheard of in the history of the world until our Constitution, and it is so precious. And so Trump has what in the private sphere would be a fiduciary duty, an obligation to deal faithfully and on behalf of the interests of the organization. The organization comes first, your personal interests come second, if at all. You may not be allowed to indulge your personal interests if there's a conflict with the interests of the organization or a misuse of the organization's assets, including things like their social media, their membership lists. So if we move from that to the president's duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, that means putting the nation first. When you said, some of the board members said to you, oh, you're not gonna, we hope You won't tell anybody about the lawsuit that's about to happen, right? You understood that they didn't want you to offer your testimony or to share information. So Trump hopes that the Russian investigation will go away through the grace of God, or if not through the grace of God, through pressure and threats and firings. It's a great example.
I should look back at the email because it said something like, "You better hope that I don't find you on the street one day."
Oh my God. That's not a thinly veiled threat.
But it had the word hope, so,
It's so clear that the word hope in a context like that means you shouldn't. When it comes from your boss or someone who's willing to break your kneecaps, it doesn't even become the focus of legal argument in cases.
Especially
Common sense.
in a conversation where you earlier asked, would you like to keep your job?
Would you like to keep your job?